Good morning, students. Today let us see about cerebellum. Cerebellum is present in the hindbrain, so it is called as rhombencephalon. It lies in the posterior cranial fossa behind the pons and medulla. It has two cerebellar hemispheres. It is being united by a vermis. Then it has two surfaces, superior and inferior. So cerebellum, as like cerebral cortex, it is also thrown into numerous transverse fold called folia. It is otherwise called as little's brain. Then the fissures present in the cerebellum are called primary fissure, horizontal fissure, posterolateral fissures. Anatomically, we can divide cerebellum into anterior lobe, posterior lobe, flocculonodular lobe. Anterior lobe lies in front of the fissura prima. The posterior lobe lies between the primary fissure and the posterolateral fissure. Flocculonodular lobe lies anterior to posterolateral fissure on the inferior surface. So this lobe consists of nodule and the flocculi. Actually, once again I have given how the cerebellum is divided into three main lobes: anterior lobe, middle or the posterior lobe, and the flocculonodular lobe. Now let us see the parts of cerebellum. So in the parts, it consists of anterior, posterior and flocculonodular lobe. In that we will be seeing the part of vermis and the part of hemisphere. So anterior lobe has a lingula, central lobule and culmen as a part of vermis. Then the part of hemisphere, it has no lateral projection and it has the anterior. Then coming to primary fissure, that is, it separates the primary fissure, as we saw in front. The primary fissure, it lies in front of the anterior lobe. Then what are the posterior lobe parts are the declive and the folium of the parts of vermis. Then the parts of hemisphere are the posterior quadrangular lobule and the superior semilunar lobule. The tuber, pyramid and uvula of the parts of vermis, and parts of the hemisphere are the inferior semilunar lobule, biventral lobule and the tonsils. So lobes of cerebellum are being presented here. The internal organization, if we see, it is similar to that of the cerebral cortex. So the cerebellar cortex also has outer surface gray matter, inner surface white matter. It consists of nuclei. There are three pairs of nuclei, like vestigial nucleus, interpositus and the dentate nucleus. So now we are going to see separately the three parts. So first, the cerebellar cortex. It is the outer gray matter. It consists of five main types of neurons. They are stellate cells, granule cells, basket cells, Purkinje cells, Golgi cells. These cells are arranged in three layers. So what are the layers? They are the molecular layer, Purkinje cell layer, granule cell layer. So molecular cell layer is the superficial, Purkinje is the middle and the granule cell layer is the deepest. Then coming to the second one, white matter of cerebellum. It is formed both by the afferent and efferent fibers. They are classified into three groups: projection fibers, association fibers and the commissural fibers. So the projection fibers, they are arranged in three bundles. So they are connected to the brainstem by three pairs of cerebellar peduncles. There are three cerebellar peduncles: superior, middle and the inferior. The superior is otherwise called caudal. It connects the cerebellum with the medulla and it contains the afferent and the efferent axons. Middle cerebellar peduncle connects the cerebellum with the pons, contains only afferent axons from pontine nuclei. Rostral or the inferior, it connects the cerebellum with the midbrain. It is predominantly efferent. Then coming to the association fibers, they connect the different regions of the same cerebellar hemispheres. And the commissural fibers, they connect the areas of two halves of cerebellar cortex with each other. Then deep cerebellar nuclei. So within the white matter, these deep nuclei are embedded. Name of the nucleus are dentate, emboliform, globosus and the vestigial nucleus. Functionally, the cerebellum can be divided into three: They are cerebrocerebellum, spinocerebellum, and vestibulocerebellum. So let us see cerebellocerebellum. It is the largest division formed by the lateral hemispheres. It is involved in planning movements and motor learning. It receives the input from the cerebral cortex and pontine nuclei. It sends the output to the thalamus and red nucleus. It regulates, coordinates the muscle activation, and it is important in visual guided movements, that is eye movement. Then spinocerebellum. It consists of vermis and intermediate zone of the cerebellar hemispheres. It is involved in regulating the body movements by allowing for error correction. It also receives the proprioceptive information. Then coming to vestibulocerebellum, it is equivalent to the flocculonodular lobe. It is involved in controlling the balance and ocular reflexes, mainly fixation on a target. It receives input from the vestibular system and sends the output back to the vestibular nuclei. So classification, functionally we can classify into vestibulocerebellum, spinocerebellum, cerebrocerebellum. Phylogenetically we can classify it into archicerebellum, paleocerebellum, and neocerebellum. So paleocerebellum and archicerebellum and neocerebellum. So archicerebellum, it is a vestibular part of the cerebellum, that is it includes the flocculonodular lobe. Paleocerebellum, it is a spinal part of cerebellum, it includes vermis and paravermis. Then summary, what we are going to finally tell is, phylogenetically we can classify that into archi, paleo, and neo. And classification by afferent connection, we are classifying into vestibulocerebellum, spinocerebellum, and pontocerebellum. Then classification through efferent connection, vermis, paravermis region, and cerebellar hemisphere. Then coming to the arterial supply of the cerebellum, it receives the arterial supply from three paired arteries: superior, inferior, superior cerebellar artery, anterior and inferior cerebellar artery, and posterior cerebral artery. So they are nothing but the branches of the basilar artery. They wrap around the anterior aspect of the pons. So it is the PICA, that is a posterior inferior cerebellar artery, is a branch of vertebral artery. Then the venous drainage, the superior inferior cerebellar veins. So venous drainage is through these veins. Then main functions of cerebellum. First, the very fine function is motor learning, sense of body position, balance and equilibrium, and fine movement coordination. That is, it mainly concentrates on the balance and stability. Then coordination of the movement, that is initiation, doing the movement smoothly, coordinating with the eye and head movements, planning and learning, cognition and learning. Then especially the cerebrocerebellum. So what it does, it receives the input from the cerebral motor cortex and adjacent premotor and somatosensory cortex of the cerebrum. So it transmits the output information into the upward direction back to the brain. So it has a feedback manner. It helps in the feedback manner with the cerebral cortical sensory motor system. So to plan the sequential voluntary body and limb movements. Planning these as much as tenth of a second in advance of the actual movement. So all planning movements are being done by the cerebellum. So it mainly maintains the muscle tone, coordination, posture and balance, eye movements, motor learning. Then coming to the dysfunction, cerebellar dysfunction. So there will be a drunken gait, so called it gait ataxia, titubation, tremor, dysmetria, dysdiadochokinesis, loss of check, that is rebound, then nystagmus, alternation to and fro motion of the eyeball, ocular dysmetria, scanning or staccato speech, cognitive dysfunction. That is how you can keep in mind is vanished. You think of the word vanished. V for vertigo, A for ataxia, N for nystagmus, I for intentional tremor, S for scanning speech, hypotonia, dysdiadochokinesia, and dysmetria. So thank you for listening.